Welcome back to Good Morning Namibia. Now, workplace conflicts are inevitable, but how they are managed makes all the difference in maintaining a productive and harmonious work environment. Effective conflict resolution fosters teamwork, improves communication, and strengthens professional relationships. Now, we've invited HR expert, that's Lisa Matomola, who joins us to share some insights on the significance of maintaining best practices for conflict resolution and a positive work environment. Lisa, very good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, this is how are you? And good morning to everyone.
Thank you. Always good to have you with us. And of course, unpacking all things HR related. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I wish I could be in the studio, but I'm not so well.
No, please get well soon. Yeah. Lisa, let's get into it. Of course, first things first, talk to us about your take on conflict resolution within the workplace. Yeah.
Thank you very much again for the question. Conflict in the workplace is inevitable, and it does occur. Somebody was saying that where, whenever there are two people involved, conflict is bound to happen, and it occurs because people have different views, diversity in the workplace, whether it's age, gender, ethnicity, background, sometimes even beliefs, aspects around personality, the way of doing things. You find that with the new ways of workplaces where you have generational differences, sometimes it's also about seniority. I often refer to seniority as the tenure that people have been in a company. So there's always that them versus us culture, and that can create conflict. We at times hear phrases like "where I come from," and that can lead to conflict when people are disagreeing in the workplace. Perceived things like unfairness. If people feel like they're being mistreated, they're not being listened to, they're not being heard, then those are some of the aspects around workplace conflict.
In addressing, conflict within the workplace, and ultimately, as a last resort, would of course where Lisa, the likes of Lisa, would come in as HR and HR experts, etc. Let's talk about, perhaps what advice you have from a gradual level of, managing conflict within the workplace. What is your advice to supervisors, to managers, in dealing with, disputes within the workplace?
Thank you very much again, Dishishi, for such a good question. Like I mentioned, it can be healthy, it can be unhealthy. For managers, supervisors, or even peers, because sometimes it can be peer-to-peer conflict. People need to just know that there will always be different opinions, but our job is to actually just be inclusive and understand that everyone else has a point of view. People will always have different ideas from us. And it's how we handle the situation. And also when it comes to conflict resolution styles, people have different conflicts. For instance, myself, I'm not the type that want to resolve a situation immediately. I would want to think about it, maybe run at least 10 kilometers and come back with a solution. So you find that some people would prefer to talk about if something happens today, they want to talk about it next week. Some would want to address it immediately. But it's important, especially from managers and supervisors, is for also for them to understand that they will always not be right all the time. They are hiring people that probably know more than they do, but it's about creating that environment where when people air their views, they are not victimized, and we refer to it as psychological safety, but also being very, very confident in handling difficult conversations, because some conflict can be really, really demanding. It requires you to choose your words. It requires you to listen more. And also jumping to conclusion, maybe if I just shorten my response to that. But very important is learning more and having evidence as to why somebody will be thinking in the way they are thinking.
about the preferences, the difference in preferences to those who prefer addressing an issue immediately and those who
Yeah.
would rather address it at a later point. Talk to us about the advantages and disadvantages as well of both addressing an issue immediately as it arises. Obviously, there's the good side of that, in that you can, of course, address and fix the issue immediately, or it could escalate. In addressing it later, the dangers thereof is that it could, of course, breed and become even bigger, or just disappear on its own. Talk to us about what you think about addressing something immediately and perhaps leaving it for a later point in time. Yeah.
Absolutely, Ndishishi. And if it's an example would be maybe a report was delayed, or a client is kept waiting, for instance. Sometimes those task-related conflicts might require somebody to discuss immediately, but it's also the how, choosing the platform. Imagine me shouting at you in front of a client is like, why didn't this happen? Why this? And sometimes we observe that even when we are walking around. And the person you are actually talking to in that manner or on that platform, you find that they either get more upset, they become more resistant, they can even become more aggressive. Some would even choose that you do yourself than for them. But then when there are cases that might emanate perhaps from the meeting, they require more thought, they require more investigation. And for some time, or sometimes some people just need to cool off, because when you want to discuss a conflict and you are angry, your emotions are high, it might mean that the words being selected, sometimes people might be threatened, intimidated. Some people would even want to resign 24 hours, which we don't advise. But it just means that we are going to manage our emotions so that we don't say things that we are going to regret. But also, as you mentioned, if we don't tackle the situation immediately, you find that there are people that avoid conflict. They don't want to talk about it. It happened. It still bothers them. It means that it's still a pending point. For some people, it might be that they hold it against you. Either they wait until your performance review. They find a way to just penalize you for that issue that happened. So it's also very, very important to open up and to share thoughts in terms of, maybe let's discuss what transpired. One of the things I read, it always mentions that when it comes to having conversations on conflict, perhaps you and I are arguing. We should switch tables or switch places. So I should be arguing from your point of view so that I get to see things differently, as opposed to just me being stuck on my own thoughts. And that way I can have a bigger picture, better view in terms of, oh, this is when the shishi is coming from. But if I'm bound to just be stuck on my own thoughts, then it means that we're not going to find a common ground. But if conflict is not resolved, unfortunately, it can create toxic work environments, morale, productivity. People don't talk to each other. I work with companies where people are not talking to each other. And imagine an environment, you are a new employee, the manager and the team are not talking, emails are sent unanswered or unresponded to. So work suffers, the stakeholders, strategic goals are derailed. So a lot of stuff really goes, but also backstabbing. We just create this environment or culture where people are just want to fight all the time. People are angry. People are not happy to be at work.
Hearing you talk about some of those strategies, and I'm glad you're the expert here.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can unpack some of the other strategies that people can employ, but also some of the strategies that HR practices, to resolve conflict within the workplace, be it on a peer-to-peer level, be it within a supervisor and a subordinate level. Talk to us about some of those best strategies to resolve conflict within the workplace. Yeah.
Thank you again for that question. So very, very important, and not just from an HR perspective, because remember, HR normally sometimes only come in when a grievance has been charged or put in. But maybe I'll start from an HR perspective. having a code of conduct, disciplinary hearing, companies also being clear in terms of how we do things, living our values. This is how we communicate. This is how we deal with situations when they occur. So it's important to investigate and to find out what is causing this conflict. Perhaps people are not emotionally intelligent. So that self-awareness, self-management can lead to conflict also, okay? Because if I don't know how to count to 10, if I don't know how to regulate my emotions, if I just say what I say without being mindful or thoughtful to say, perhaps I should have said this instead of saying that. So that is very important, and it's on an ongoing basis. So I do encourage companies to have their employees trained, not only managers, on emotional intelligence and also conflict resolution, processes such as anger management. Sometimes without the ones of classroom training, people can go on coaching just to discover yourself. What is causing this? And human beings can change. Being open to feedback. I'm a very, very firm believer that when we give people feedback, I myself open to feedback. It helps you to understand, to say, okay, maybe sometimes I overreact too much, or I jump to conclusion. I don't listen more. It's always my point of view. I'm not very accommodative. I don't collaborate. I blame. Because with conflict, we also tend to blame other people more as compared to understanding. When it comes to how we treat people, do we take sides? The environment, for instance, highly pressurized environment, stressful environment. If teams are understaffed and overloaded with work, the volume of work, that can also lead to conflict. Because now I feel like I'm doing too much, I'm not compensated for it, and that can really also bring conflict. But it's at the bottom of it is understanding what is causing this conflict, and coming up with ways, strategies for us to mitigate, minimize, because sometimes you can't eradicate, so that we can improve. Encourage communication. If people don't talk, unfortunately, if conflict cannot be resolved in silence. So having to have, I remember in my previous job, we had opportunity to have guilt-free conversation. It didn't matter whether it was with the MD, the senior management team, but as long as somebody had an issue, they were encouraged to voice up. But it's also the how they had to say it. So that is what I teach Namibian organization. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, but also walking away without catching feelings.
I could talk to you about this all day, but just in closing, just talk to us about the dangers of normalizing a toxic work environment. You've mentioned it, that of course, you work with a number of companies. You see this all the time. Just in closing,
Yeah.
talk to us about the dangers of normalizing this culture, this toxic culture. And, we see it all around. And just in
Yeah.
closing as well, in HR, they say people do not leave companies, they leave bad managers and bad supervisors. Talk to us about that as well in closing.
Such a very, very powerful statement. And we can't overemphasize. People don't leave companies, they leave people. And I'll close off by always quoting my favorite statement that says, the great workplace is stunning colleagues. So if we allow conflict to happen all the time without discussing or resolving it, it means that employees will be excluded from projects. The type of meetings that we'll be having, we'll have an environment where when you walk in, people are screaming at one another. If you have a supervisor, they are likely not to promote you. They will not fight for you because at times the supervisor is the one who must vouch for me, defend my performance where others can't see because they work directly with me. You miss out on projects, so you are given tasks that are really very basic, below your pay grade, or sometimes you can also be put in a situation where people want to set you up for failure. Some employees, it can go as far as psychologically, you find that I often tell companies that about 80% of chronic illnesses emanate from the workplace. So high blood pressure, people become depressed, employees lose their confidence. So even if you send me to MBC, I don't know what I, because I don't believe in myself. Sometimes I would rather just away from work. So from an absenteeism, uh, people would stay away. We go to the doctor to say we are sick, but we just want to avoid certain people. I can go on and on, but those are like high level. But at the end of the day, the company, the image, the reputation, it becomes tarnished. And we just have teams where collaboration, teamwork, all these things that we expect from teams, communication, don't occur. So to close off, I just want to say we need to resolve conflict. And conflict is 10% differences and 90% how we deliver or resolve. So the tone, we need to be mindful. And for those that are good at it, let's teach others. Let's send people for training. Let's also read books. You know, there's podcasts, information out there. So let's equip ourselves. People don't know what they don't know, and if given feedback, it's not that people are attacking you. Somebody calls you a horse. One person calls you a horse. They don't like you. If two people call you a horse, conspiracy theory. But if three people call you a horse, then you know what to do. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much. Always appreciate your insights, all things HR related. Thank you for being with us, and we wish you a splendid day.
Thank you, Ndishisi, and have a good day.
Have it, human resource expert, that's Lisa Matomola, talking to us this morning about conflict resolution and the importance of fostering a positive work environment, saying that, of course, people do have differences, be it cultural, be it upbringing, etc. But it is important to work together, find productive means to resolve, of course, conflicts within the workplace and ensure that the company at the end of the day is the focus and driving that company forward. To stay with us.